Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Taylor Spence, and I am a historian and an artist living in New Mexico. And today I want to think about the Western Rangelands and how the visual arts might support the people who live in those rangelands to sustainably use them and also to cohabitate peacefully. So I'm just going to share my screen now, have some slides for you. So yeah, how can the visual arts serve the sustainable use of the Western Rangelands? And how can they also foster peaceful cohabitation in these very contested spaces? I see at least two ways that they can do this. The first is to educate the wider public about the beauty, significance, and fragility of rangeland landscapes. The visual arts can lift these landscapes up, and they can encourage people to protect them and to manage them well. These visual memorials, if you will, can take the form of private purchases or public projects. The second is to provide a meeting ground for the diverse and often conflicting constituencies who live on and seek to use the Western Rangelands. The visual arts can aid in healing and building bridges in rangeland communities. For example, Dene citizen Chip Thomas's mural in Elko, Nevada, about the effects of global warming on his Great Basin homeland offers one example of this community conversation building potential. However, many examples of rangelands art contain painful, insulting, and divisive depictions which serve narratives of racial superiority and justified right. These depictions undermine the community building potential of the visual arts by broadcasting messages of exclusive use, a lack of belonging for some, and a disrespect of the diverse people, and the ways that they have lived on and used the rangelands. Some art appropriates Indigenous history and culture in service to settler history and culture. Here, for example, a brochure for St. Louis uses the Cahokia Mounds to presage the Gateway Arch, a symbol of westward expansion. Ojibwe historian Jeannie O'Brien calls this, quote, firsting and lasting, the act of marking the beginning and the end of Indigenous peoples to assuage settler guilt about taking land and resources from them. Now, she was talking about this in terms of the rhetoric of community histories, but the idea also applies to the visual arts as well. Littered across the land in countless government buildings, schools, and post offices, these former visual community unifiers are now visual community dividers. They offend as many viewers as they delight. Public and applied historians can repurpose these images as community discourse sites, I think, to spark discussions about where the people who inhabit this continent have been, what has happened, and where they might go in the future. An example of a community divider mural that was once a unifier is this Frank Michaud mural about the origins of the Pony Express, which has since been covered over. More can be gained by repurposing these older, frankly, offensive works than by destroying them. The political process of airing grievances, of hearing multiple viewpoints, and then accepting that we as a society have changed and therefore our visual arts must also change, on the whole, I think is salubrious for the society. In some cases, discussions lead to decommissioning certain works from the public view, such as this series of murals at the Zimmerman Library at the University of New Mexico. These processes remind us of an important fact, that multiple and possibly irreconcilable groups reside on this continent. No one group, people, viewpoint, or even species will ever be able to dominate and have only its vision of the land, or the Western Rangelands, if you will, dominate. Visual art of the rangeland should humble us and teach us to respect and appreciate all who have come before and to steward the rangelands for those who will come. Dene artist Stephen Yazzie subtly questions these disparate relationships to the Western rangelands with his series of coyote paintings, where coyote is situated in a variety of landscapes, quote, devoid of humans, but with artifacts of human lives. The rangeland is not a backdrop, but coyote's proper context, which she carries with her, and the human objects and forms and their attendant associations of the Western imaginations become the outliers or the artifacts. Some classic depictions of rangeland life can still inspire and uplift, reminding us of the daily struggle of folks to carve out a life in an often harsh and unforgiving environment. Take, for example, this mural by Jenny Magafan for the Albion, Nebraska Post Office, which she painted in 1939. The relationship here depicted between human and non-human, as well as the dogged determination of this farmer to go about his daily work, provide a near universal portrayal of the human experience, I think. Yet the land itself might offer a bridge to bringing multiple and sometimes conflicting Western communities together. With the shared experience of a mega drought, with the global forces of capitalist agriculture and resource extracting impacting all of us, with new groups coming to contest and seek to use the Western rangelands, we inhabitants of these spaces are ever more aware of the fragility as well as the preciousness of our landscapes. Beauty is such a persuasive common denominator. It can open minds and hearts, but so often beautiful depictions such as this Anna Kafurl painting are the sole purview of the wealthy. Market-based landscape painting is fundamentally different in subtler colonial spaces than in other places. The wealthy's exclusive possession of art treasures reiterates their exclusive use of land, reinforcing the harsh income and class disparities of the rangelands. This is why public art about the rangelands and the diverse people who call them home is so important. If the visual arts are to function as a social bridge, these public and more contemporary and diverse visions of the rangelands must be brought to the fore. The same lessons taken from repurposing older public art pieces should be brought into the commissioning of new public art for rangeland communities. Yet so often, public art depicting people of color, the poor, and the marginalized and their cultures and concerns is relegated to the side of a wall, outside, and subject to the elements and rapid deterioration. While these murals come from an important art historical tradition, the community mural movement, whose aim was to critique the mainstream art world as elite and out of touch with the common people, murals like this Noel Marquez mural need constant repainting in order to survive. This inside-outside dynamic sets up the perception of inequity. Historic art about the rangelands harkens back to a bygone conception of the American heartland as white, male, and settler. These pieces are often indoors and can be preserved and protected. Community murals that reflect a more contemporary understanding of the rangelands tend to be out of doors, subject to decay and degradation. Thus, this alternate vision of the rangelands is ever fugitive and fading. Mediums have a message. Buon fresco is the most durable painting medium humans have discovered. Frescoes are literally built into the architecture. They're meant to be permanent, or as permanent as human beings have discovered. They use minerals from the earth, they require specialized training, specific conditions, and they can only be indoors. Diego Rivera, Michelangelo, and Giotto chose this medium for their projects because it embodied their funders' commitment, and theirs, it should be said, commitment as well, to permanence. This piece used buon fresco to lift the land up into center stage. I laid all the mountains around the world on the same latitude of the World Trade Center tower in New York City, in New York City, next to each other, thereby creating a global rangeland landscape. The trade centers were themselves like mountains, after all. The fresco was on wire mesh, which served as an antenna for a shortwave radio. sounds, languages, and stories from around the world came into the space. Fresco is the stuff of the rangelands itself. The ochres I used came from various places around the globe. Thus, the medium shifted the focus from users to the land and gave everyone the opportunity to inhabit and contemplate the beauty of the rangelands. The message was, we share this rangelands commons, and we are all responsible for stewarding it. In this piece, I gave a diverse array of historical figures possession of the rangelands to explore how information technology has comprised part of a long-standing tradition of resistance to colonization in the upper Rio Grande Valley. In the center, New Mexico's Lady in Blue symbolizes how indigenous communities have transformed tools of oppression, such as forced conversion to Catholicism, into a tool of resistance and transformation. The mural argues that information technology has the same potential to empower and transform communities. While the visual arts have the potential to increase awareness of the beauty, significance, and fragility of the rangelands, they may also be able to provide common ground for diverse groups to come together in the shared project of stewarding rangeland resources and protecting them for future generations. However, without recognizing that rangelands have also been sites of trauma, and without real compensation and reclamation for these rangeland tragedies, the potential for healing and long-term peaceful cohabitation will remain limited. Thanks for watching my talk, and stay tuned for more talks about the visual arts and Western history to come.